The cold morning of January 13, 1970, brought a silence to Soledad prison that felt deceptive. The O-Wing yard had been locked down for weeks, a precaution after the killing of black convict Dopey Dan by Mexican mafia member Raymond Alvarez. Racial tension between whites, blacks, and Chicanos had reached a boiling point, and the administration believed it could be contained by separating men, controlling movement, and limiting outdoor exercise. But that morning, prison brass decided the yard would reopen. 15 prisoners at a time, integrated regardless of race and gang, would be marched into the 40-foot by 150-foot rectangle of concrete that served as their exercise yard. Guard Opie Miller, a retired Army veteran with 20 years of service, stood high above in a newly constructed wooden gun tower. He adjusted the sling of his .30 caliber rifle, the weapon gleaming dull in the January light. The first 15 men filed out, towels slung over shoulders. On the Black Guerilla Family side came leaders W. L. Nolan, Cleveland Edwards, and Alvin "Jug" Miller. The Aryan Brotherhood responded with their own: Robert "Chucko" Wendickier, Billy "Buzzard" Harris, and a wiry, restless figure from Fresno, Ronnie Harper. It didn't take long. The two factions had been hurling insults and threats through bars for months. Now they were face to face on open ground. A shove, a punch, then fists flew, towels swung like flails, men brawling in a storm of curses and violence. From above, Miller saw bodies locked together. He didn't wait for backup. He shouldered the rifle, sighted into the chaos, and pulled the trigger. The crack of the first shot froze the yard for half a second, long enough for the second and third rounds to slam into flesh. When the smoke cleared, 3 black prisoners, Nolan, Edwards, and Miller, were dead. Buzzard Harris screamed on the ground, a testicle obliterated by gunfire. Harpo, unhurt, looked around at the carnage. He knew what this meant. Prison life, already vicious, was about to enter a new era of blood feud. Ronnie Dean Harper entered the world on February 28, 1948, in Fresno, California. He was the youngest of 5 children born to Harold and Minnie Harper. Fresno in the late 1940s was a city of contrasts. Fertile farmland, a booming agricultural industry, but also pockets of poverty and crime. Harpo grew up wild, a boy who seemed to fear nothing and respect no one. By the time most kids were thinking about cars and dances, Harpo was being state-raised. He cycled in and out of the California Youth Authority for burglary, assault, and resisting arrest. His family couldn't control him. Teachers had given up. Law enforcement knew his name. By July 1965, at just 17, Harpo was once again in custody. This time he was held at Fresno County Hospital, undergoing an examination before being sent back to the Youth Authority on another assault charge. But Harpo had his own plans. On the morning of July 9, 1965, he slipped out of the hospital and disappeared. That night, he reappeared at Imperial Liquor on North Cedar Avenue, revolver in hand. It was 11:25 p.m. when Harpo entered through the door of Imperial Liquor. Clerk Harold Hargis, 71, stood behind the counter. Tony Papagni and his 12-year-old daughter were shopping inside. Harpo brandished the .38 and barked orders. Hargis handed over $69 from the till. But Harpo wasn't finished. He forced the clerk, Papagni, and the little girl out the door and into the alley behind the store. The girl started to cry. Papagni pleaded with Harpo, "She's only a kid. Let her go." Harpo paused, then waved the girl off. She ran, sobbing, into the night. In the alley, Harpo told the two men they could go back. As they turned, he raised the revolver and fired. The bullet slammed into Hargis's back. Papagni bolted, sprinting into the dark. Harpo fired again but missed. Hargis would survive but spend the rest of his life paralyzed from the waist down. The next evening, Highway Patrol stopped a car for a routine traffic violation. Harpo sat in the passenger seat. The officer took the driver's information and let them go. But later, when news of the liquor store shooting hit the radio, the description of the gunman sounded familiar. Deputies went to the driver's address and found Harpo waiting inside. On August 5, 1965, Harpo appeared before Superior Court Judge Harold V. Thompson. Though only 17, the decision was made to try him as an adult. In September, he entered a plea of not guilty, and not guilty by reason of insanity. The charges were serious: armed robbery, assault with intent to commit murder, and kidnapping during a robbery. His trial began in November. It was decided by a judge, not a jury. On February 24, 1966, Judge Matt Goldstein found him guilty on all counts. He also ruled Harpo sane. When sentencing came on April 4, Harpo showed no remorse. Told he would serve life without parole, he sneered, "I can do that standing on my head." At 17, he had already thrown away his life. Harpo's first stop was Dual Vocational Institution in Tracy, a way station for young convicts. Staff quickly pegged him as a management control problem. By February 1967, he was locked in the adjustment center. On Valentine's Day, Harpo and another Fresno inmate, Richard Klenk, attacked James Strickland. They stabbed him 12 to 17 times in the head, neck, chest, and stomach. Strickland barely survived thanks to blood transfusions. Harpo and Klenk were suspects, but with no witnesses willing to talk, charges collapsed. Strickland himself refused to testify. By June 1967, the case was dismissed. DVI was done with Harpo. He was shipped to the correctional training facility in Soledad, California, where the racial climate was combustible. By the late 1960s, Soledad Prison was a pressure cooker. Blacks, Chicanos, and whites clashed daily. The killing of Dopey Dan in April 1968 turned the place into open warfare. The prison administration responded by shutting down the O-Wing yard. Men were left to stew in their cells, shouting, spitting, and hurling urine and feces at each other through the bars. Aryan Brotherhood member Robert Chuko Wendikir later described it. "If I was on a tier with a black inmate, I did whatever I could to hurt him in any way I could. If I had a knife, I'd try to kill him. If I had a zip gun, I'd try to shoot him." When officials reopened the yard in January 1970, they believed strict controls would keep violence in check. Instead, it created one of the most infamous incidents in California prison history, the January 1970 O-Wing shooting. Harpo was there, fists clenched, when the shots rang out. He watched 3 black men fall dead at his feet. He knew what would come next: vengeance. Now let's turn our attention to Harpo's old lady, because you can't tell the story of one without the other. Gerald Sheridan Hendershot, better known as Geri, was born August 4, 1942, in San Joaquin County. By his teens, he was in trouble burglarizing stores with a partner. In 1960, he was sent to the California Youth Authority. By 1962, he graduated to armed robbery and was sentenced to 5 to life. In July 1969, at Vacaville's California Medical Facility, Geri fatally stabbed an inmate named Dennis Dimmock with a shank and wounded another. His motives were murky, but his violent reputation was sealed. Harpo and Geri became a deadly partnership. Although Geri was not a member of the Aryan Brotherhood and could never become a member due to his role as the female in the relationship between him and Harpo, he stood side by side Harpo while Harpo unleashed murder and mayhem on behalf of the Aryan Brotherhood, rising to the top of the brand hierarchy alongside men such as Ronald Spotsberg. They were suspected of having carried out the murder of Dirty Red, but no one was foolish enough to testify against the deadly duo. In the prison world of the 1960s and 70s, there existed a shadow economy around punks and queens, inmates forced or willing to take on the role of women. Some were rented out, others sold, and a few became old ladies, committed partners to stronger convicts. Geri was openly homosexual and eventually became Harpo's old lady or wife. By the early 1970s, the two were inseparable, a prison marriage in all but name. Geri cooked, cleaned, and shared Harpo's cell. In a world where weakness was death, Harpo had a partner he trusted. By 1980, Harpo's loyalty to the Aryan Brotherhood was gone. The endless cycles of stabbing and betrayal had worn him down. He and Geri transferred to protective custody in Tehachapi, California, where they lived among other defectors. Harpo testified against fellow brand member Curtis Price in the 1979 murder of Dennis Bonnet at San Quentin. Geri corroborated his account. The defense attorney shredded their credibility, and Price walked free. But Harpo had crossed a line. He was a snitch and a punk in the eyes of his former brothers. In 1985, tragedy struck when Geri died of cancer in Tehachapi. Harpo carried on, but a piece of him was gone. In February 1990, after nearly 25 years behind bars, Harpo was paroled. He returned to Fresno working as a janitor. For a brief moment, it seemed he might fade quietly into obscurity. But later that year, he was accused of raping a female acquaintance. The disposition of the case is unclear, though court records show a child support case opened shortly afterward. Harpo's only other arrest came in November 2010, when police found him with drugs. He pled guilty, served a day in jail, and was ordered to complete substance abuse counseling. On January 6, 2014, Ronnie Harper died in Fresno. His life was violent from start to finish: robberies, shootings, stabbings, riots, and betrayal. He embodied a prison era when homosexuality, coercion, and racial warfare were commodities in the underground subculture of the concrete jungles of the CDC. When he finally left the Aryan Brotherhood, his former brothers branded him what they considered the worst thing possible: a punk. For decades he lived inside a cement box, feared and hated, only to end up a cautionary tale. His story illustrates the brutal realities of prison gang politics, a system where loyalty was fleeting, violence constant, and survival never guaranteed. In the end, the boy from Fresno who once bragged he could do life standing on his head discovered that no one truly escapes the walls, not even when the gates finally open.